Good afternoon. My name is Joe Bandel and I am the last Rosicrucian. The subject of today's video is um, the supernatural. And I've spent a lot of posts and I've spent a lot of time basically trying to explain experiences or things that my understanding are how it is. And that's not what I'm trying to do in this video. In this video, what I'm trying to do, I'm just kind of throw away all that, what it's about stuff, and I'm just going to try to share my personal experiences and why I believe the way that I do in regards to so-called supernatural experiences or the supernatural in general. Because in a lot of ways, you're never going to convince a person who doesn't want to believe. And there's so many things that you just need personal experience. In my own life, it's the same way. I've read and I've read and I've read. You get this explanation after explanation after explanation. And thankfully, I've accumulated over the years, full lifetime, I've accumulated enough experiences of my own that that I know what I believe. I know from experience what I believe. And I wrote down a few things here that I'm going to try to talk about just briefly that kind of say why I believe in what a lot of people would consider supernatural events, just for what it is. Now, and I'm going to break them down into two parts. Most of my Gaia update videos are based upon information that I get from, well, truthfully, probably from dreams and visions. Some of it I get from meditations, but that's basically what a person could say. Well, let me just say I'm going to try to separate things that come to me when I'm asleep and things that happen to me during the day when I'm wide awake and I'm moving around and things like that. So this first group of things I'm going to talk about that happen to me when I'm wide awake. No meditation, nothing like that. It's just the complete waking state. And then I'll switch over to some of the other things. So I'm going to kind of ramble a little bit here, but first I want to say that as a child I was very sensitive and very much of an empath. And a lot of times it was hard for me to tell where I stopped and another person began. So I was very sensitive to uh, situations and to other people. And I really, really didn't want to hurt anybody. But I could tell if I could make people laugh. You know, it was kind of. And when I was in school, especially in high school, a lot of times the teacher would be trying to teach the class and address the class like social studies, a real dry subject, or history or something like that. And I could understand where the teacher was coming from. But I'd look around the room and I could see that a lot of other kids, they were just like blank slates. Whatever the teacher said was just going straight over their heads. And the teacher, I would ask questions, and I would ask questions not because I really had the question, but because I knew that if I asked that particular question, the other kids would understand what the teacher was getting at. And I remember seeing looks of gratitude that came from the teachers when I did that, because it was like they were stuck. They didn't know how to proceed. They couldn't proceed. They were getting absolutely no feedback from the other students. And then I was giving them something, and then all of a sudden it was a bridge where other people could understand. Now, after I graduated from high school, this was probably, I think it was 1976, 1977, I joined the Rosicrucians AMORC and began getting weekly monographs of study material that took over weekly monographs for over 22 years. And a phenomenon happened that in some ways, when I started studying the Rosicrucian material, I was turning to them for source and for insight rather than from myself. And to a certain extent, that psychic ability, I don't want to say completely disappeared or whatever, but I want to say that anytime you're joining a system or you're joining a study, tradition, or something like that, what you're doing is you're listening to them instead of listening to yourself. And that temporarily disempowers. I say temporarily because the Rosicrucians knew this, and they basically said, we're going to teach you how to read, and then we're going to put you in the library of the cosmic, if you will, where you can get your own information for yourself. In other words, they openly admitted they were just a crutch, that you weren't meant to count on forever and ever and ever or whatever, but just something to help you get started. And one of the things that they really, really were strong about was what they called the master within, that spoke with the still small voice of conscience. And that you had all the answers you needed if you inside, and that master, that inner master, that master within, or they also called it the Christ spirit, would give you the answers that you needed. So you didn't need those monographs. You didn't need those studies. You didn't need the external authorities. So I was very fortunate that that was built right into the Rosicrucian teachings, which was, so it was not a hierarchical, like, listen to the top person at the top type of thing. Each person was ultimately told the ultimate authority had to be inside yourself. And I just bring that up. I don't know why, but I think it's important to talk about, because in today's world everybody's looking for authorities, they're looking for experts, they're looking for anything but the master within, that still small voice. And so I'm trying to just share that a little bit. Now, some of these experiences, and like I said, the first experiences I'm going to talk about are those that happened to me during the waking days, or with full awake consciousness. And I'm going to skip around in life because I have a few things written down as they occurred to me, and I'm just going to kind of pick them. There was a time in life when I was, uh, my wife and I went to a spirit, mind, body convention or expo. So it was a lot of almost like a psychic fair or whatever, but it was a lot more than that. Uh, kind of a whole, it had a wide range of things. And I was going along, and there was one person that he read auras. And I've always, it's kind of weird because do I see auras? I don't really see auras. Like I can't really, I don't see colors particularly that way. Everybody has a different way of perceiving things, but I'm very sensitive. And maybe I don't need to see auras. But anyway, this one person, he was had a booth there, and he just would kind of get talking about it, and they'd say, "Okay, I'm gonna check your aura here," and he. So I was talking to him, and he says, "Okay, I can tell right now you have kind of a brownish aura around your heart." And he said, "But then the crown chakra is really bright and really opened up," and he is saying, "And I can't tell how high it goes." So I kind of laughed at that a little bit. But the thing is that I do have uh, circulatory issues. I have high blood pressure, things like that, and it was a pretty accurate diagnosis, I guess, that there's kind of I need my heart chakra. I really needed to work on that, and I did. I have since that time. But that was one of the things that I was recognizing. This was uh, it was kind of an interesting thing because so many of us walk a solitary path, and we're never exposed, or we're never able to hang out around other people that are following a similar path. So getting feedback from one another is very interesting. That just occurred to me, but the one I was really wanting to talk about was at the same expo. There was a person that was selling, there were some kind of boards like a Ouija board. It wasn't a Ouija board, but it was basically the same thing. You had the letters out there, and you had a planchette or whatever they call it that you put your fingers on, and it would go around and answer questions for you. And as we went by, they were calling out, and hey, come and ask a question for free or whatever, see how it works. And started talking, whatever, and then so he told me, okay, now think of your question and put your fingers on one side of the planchette, and he put his fingers on the other side, and behold, the thing went over to no. It went over there pretty fast. And I was like, that was literally the first time I'd ever done anything like a Ouija board. And I'd always kind of wanted to know what it was like or whatever, but there'd been a lot of warnings that were kind of about it. And I don't know, so it was just kind of interesting. So it said no. And then he said, well, did that answer your question? I said, yeah, I guess so. I said, my question was, should I buy one of these things? And he was pretty shocked. He was really shocked, and he was really curious. Then he was like, "Do you mind if I ask a question or something like that for you?" You know, and so put my fingers back on the planchette, and he did it also. And then he says, "Do you have any spirit guides or helpers or whatever you want to call it around you?" And the planchette moved again, and it came up with the number 12. And he was like, his jaw almost dropped, and he was like, "That's crazy. This is crazy." And at the same time, I got a migraine that was so damn painful and so damn bad that it's like the rest of the afternoon I was struggling with that headache. It was something like I wasn't supposed to know about. So but that gave a kind of an example of, okay, there's these entities or whatever that are hanging around and watching me. Another time I was out at the farm. I was staying out at my family farm for a while, and I remember this was after I just came out of the Air Force, and I was going through a divorce and a bad time or whatever. But I was also really trying to work on healing and the spiritual path, things like that. And I'd really been pushing it in terms of what you call rupturing the astral planes on a daily basis. And all of a sudden, as clear as somebody right next to me, this voice came out and said, "He dares much." And then there was a shh and nothing else. And that sticks with me because I have never heard voices. I know of people that talk about they're hearing voices. Sometimes they're channelers, they hear the voices and they just repeat what, or they allow that kind of thing happening. But I've never, just this one time. And it was like a mistake, and it's like there was two people there, two entities there, and one was just so young or undisciplined, and they just blurted out, and the other person just said shh. Okay, so that's an experience, and it's rare, but it was just walking along. That's an example of why I believe there are these unseen entities that are around us all the time. Okay, the next one on the list here. After I'd started studying my weekly monographs, the Rosicrucian monographs, I'd reached an initiation point. In the beginning, you have these introductory monographs. You go through the atrium 1, 2, 3, whatever, and finally you get to the first degree where you're actually like starting a thing, and they have these self initiations. And I don't know if it was the first initiation or if it was later on the second one or whatever, but it was during one of these self initiations. And I was at home, and I'd set out the certain things like for the ritual. Usually you have like a candle or two candles, maybe some incense that was burning, and typically maybe a mirror to look into. At least it's kind of how I remember some of that stuff. And going through the self-initiation, and it was very powerful. But then all of a sudden, a master appeared in the living room about 6 feet away from me or whatever it was, and they were floating about waist high, cross-legged, they had robes on, and they were just sitting there and being, and radiating this power or whatever. They were not trying to give me a message or anything. They were just there, and I was like, "What am I seeing?" And I remember actually walking around, physically walking around 360 degrees, walking around this master to see it from all sides, to see that, oh, this is really real, it's really in the room. And of course, that really gave a burst of encouragement to my Rosicrucian studies. But the point I'm getting at is this is, you could say, a supernatural event in a way, because it, here I am in ordinary conscious. Well, I was in that state of mind with an initiation or whatever, so I was open to it. And later, there were several instances, not only just at initiation points, but at other times when I had that master appear to me, or even a group of you could say, higher level Rosicrucians that I could kind of see hanging up by the ceiling, as if you're in an opera house and you're on one of those balconies and you're looking down watching the show. I was very familiar with that over the years, because that's where a lot of the high adepts hang out. That area that's actually above the great abyss. And you can, if you're, once you cross the great abyss, you can kind of see that. You're aware of those adepts, if you will. So that's another example of non-physical entities or beings, I guess, that shape my life, my belief system. Now, here's another one called astral projection. Now, this is kind of a strange thing, because it's taken me a long, long time to come to terms with astral projection and what it really is. But I remember one time as a kid that I just suddenly lost consciousness, and when I woke up, and I was up by the ceiling someplace, and I was looking down at my physical body, and then I snapped back in. Now, over the years, what's happened is I've developed and permanently activated all of my astral bodies, all 7 of them. And at one time I was really, well, there was a time when I was not that fully developed, but I was really mentally projection, or sending out mental probes, and what you would call mental projections rather than astral projections, because astral tend to be more emotional content, if you will. So it was kind of like mentally projecting, but it was still a form of projection. And there were times when I would kind of send out probes towards people, like some of my favorite authors or some of the family or things like that. And some of those times I would kind of like send out these feelers or these probes toward a person that I didn't know. It was like maybe it was an author that I was interested in or whatever. And all of a sudden, I'd be attacked. I could sense I was being attacked, fiercely attacked. Like they sensed my probe and they turned around and were coming at me, guns blazing. And I was like, oh shit, what did I do? Okay. Because I didn't know I didn't know any better. I'd bumble through a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of times in my life where I kind of like, oh shit, what did I do? But that's some of them. And I would have to defend myself. And then there's these other people, the same thing. I'd send out probes and nothing had happened, or even there'd be an affirmation, a welcoming. And I was like, okay, there's a difference. There's a difference between all of a sudden somebody's blazing guns blazing at you, or totally neutral. It's like they don't even sense that you're there, or like there's a real welcoming energy. And these feelings were very definite, but they were feelings that were happening through this probe that I was sending out. It's not like in a dream or something like that. So I was able to recognize that kind of thing. And a similar thing kind of goes into, as I was in that time, I was really prone to astral battles, astral duels, where almost every night I'd have 1, 2, or 3 severe like conflicts in the astral, which I won. Once in a while I'd tie, but in the beginning I'd barely escape. And in the beginning, to barely escape, what I'd do is I would pop up to a higher level and they'd win at the lower level, but I'd remain unharmed. My core would remain unharmed, if you will. And later on, as I became more and more powerful, more and more proficient at astral battles, I didn't pop up anymore, and I'd stayed there. And there came a point where I became powerful enough to where I'd actually go underneath somebody, and they were the ones that would pop up. Yeah, so what I'm talking about is how if you're going underneath, well, that means you won the battle, and they might have just popped off someplace, but you got what you needed. Other times there was just, you couldn't resolve the issues. You're sensing these things and they just would not resolve and would not resolve. It was a stalemate. So I was, over the years and over these experiences, able to make a discernment on several different types of things that happened in the astral planes. By astral, I also mean the etheric planes, the mental planes. I'm lumping them all together. But they existed. In my mind, there's no doubt that these things were happening, because sometimes you get this kind of a result, sometimes you get this kind, sometimes you get that kind. So it was real, even if the images were symbolic, the energies were really there. Another experiences that I've had that would be in physical, normal waking consciousness, but where you'd really uh, you'd experience a subjective, you'd experience a supernatural element, were initiations. And I'm not going to talk about self initiations, as I already mentioned some of those, but physical initiations where you're actually physically initiated, and how there's the energy of an egregore that you can sense, and that it actually shapes your soul. It shapes you. And I'll share some there's some physical initiations that I've had. I've had a lot of the York Rite Freemasonry initiations up through Knights of the Temple. They were powerful and symbolic, um, but not so much. But I mean, they were there. Uh, the OTO. I actually had 4 OTO physical initiations that were very powerful, very magical, and definitely very, very real. Rosicrucian initiations, I also have had some of those. I've had 4 of those, even though there's 12 degrees. A lot of times, the Rosicrucians, a lot of places, they don't have lodges where they can have initiations. For example, Minnesota, the state of Minnesota where I'm at, I'm the only, I think there might be one other Rosicrucian that lives within 60 miles of me. Maybe I've never met him, but I have the impression that there's one person there. And so you can go, there may be an entire state, there may be only 50, 20, 50 people or whatever, and they're probably going to be in the big cities. But I did serve on an initiation team with the Rosicrucians, and they also had an affiliate organization called the Traditional Martinist Order. And I was also able to perform on the ritual team where I was on the other end of the initiations, where I was one of the officers that was giving the initiation to candidates. And that was I'm thinking of one especially, that was a very powerful experience in which I was acting a part of chaplain, I believe it was, and the role totally took me over, and I performed the function. And I could feel that I was actually just a tool, if you will, of the egregore. So I'm talking about sensing unseen things, sensing the paranormal in a way. The Can you call it supernatural? What I'm saying is these are experiences where they're real, and over time, the ability to be sensitive and to understand these things became more real and more real as we went along. Uh, Here's I've written about, we talk about ghosts, and I've had experiences with ghosts, if you will, or the spirits of the dead or the dying, and being a psychopomp, which is actually where there's a spirit and they're lost, or they need to get to the light and they don't know how. There's an old mentor of mine that taught me, I call him Voodoo Bob, and actually he stated that at the moment of death there needs to be a gate opener so the spirit of the dead can get to the other side properly. And if there is no gate opener, that spirit is doomed to wander the earth, the lower levels, lost. And that gate opener can either be in a physical body or they can be a spirit in a non-physical body. But there needs to be a gate opener. And I have functioned as a gate opener in several instances. I've written about some of them. That's also very it's unpleasant, I guess. Unpleasant. You're talking about ghosts. A lot of times, if you're having direct contact with ghosts, one of the things that happens a lot is you have that first initial contact. There's a spark that jumps between the two of you, and you relive the moment of death of that ghost, which, if it was a horrifying death, it's really horrifying for you. And I have had that happen where I was trying to help somebody I found out that they had a spirit, a ghost, a spirit that was attached to them. And in the process of trying to remove that spirit from that person, I took it upon myself or whatever, absorbed it or let it latch onto me or whatever. And then during the night, I experienced it. I helped it get to the light or whatever, but I actually sensed the death of that person who, it was an accidental death, but it was by strangulation. And it was a young teenager that was doing one of those games where they kind of have an orgasm while they're strangling because it's supposedly more intense, and they just must have blacked out or whatever, and they died. And it was not intended to do that. And what happened was they were at their best friend's house, and their best friend found them in the bathroom hanging from the shower rod or whatever it was. And that entity had attached itself to his friend because it was so fearful. And there's other instances where my wife's mother died, and right before she died, she tried to take over the spirit. She tried to take possession of my wife's body. And my wife's father, we were at his deathbed. I was in the room there with them when his spirit actually tried to take possession of mine. And I just mentally put my hands out and said, "Oh, wait a minute here." And I grabbed onto him, and I called in some angels, called in some light, or whatever, and said, "Here, take this guy." And that's two instances of that kind of thing. Well, three instances of spirits trying to take possession or attaching themselves to other people. Very frightening. When my mom died, I was not physically in the room, but I could sense the moment that she passed, and she was scared, and I actually was able to project myself there and be there for her in a non-physical way and call in some angels, call in some light, and help her connect that way and ease her passing. So that's what you're talking about, a psychopomp type thing. There was one lady that she called me because she had a ghost problem. There were actually, she said, two ghosts that were haunting the property. And would I get rid of them? And of course, I said, yeah, sure, I'll get rid of them or whatever. I went over there and I kind of did a banishing type of thing or whatever, and I could kind of sense the ghosts or whatever, and like a stupid ass, I said, okay, I'm just going to absorb them, so then they're not in the house anymore, and I'll get rid of them later. And that night, I had one of the most vivid dreams that I've ever had in my life. And here I'm talking about a dream that not really about the being in normal waking life, but this was not a normal dream by any means because it was literally another reality. It was a barren, dark world that had some kind of like trees, bare trees, some brush, and there was two Native Americans. One was walking, and they were just walking and walking and looking. And the other one was on a white horse, and they were just riding and riding and galloping and galloping. Um, there was no sense of malevolence. There was just a sense that they were lost. And I crouched under a bush as they went by me. It was one of the creepiest things that I've experienced. Because that was no damn dream. Uh, and they went on by me and they passed out. And later the lady called me up and she said, "Well, the ghosts are back, but you know what? They're behaving. They're not really causing any problem." So you look at the supernatural, you look at these things, and I'm kind of saying, okay, am I crazy or are these things happening for real? Is there a structure to these things? Is there a science that's behind these things? And I'm like, yeah, definitely these are real. Okay, let me check some of the others here. I could mention being at funerals. And a lot of times people say that at funerals, uh, a lot of times the dead spirit comes to say goodbye to all its friends, maybe sitting there, whatever. And I got to tell you, I avoid funerals if there's any way that I can avoid them. I don't really particularly care for that. How, however, I do know of a few funerals where it's kind of like in my mind's eye, I could see the departed and they were happy and they were kind of floating around and there was a good feeling. And there was a good feeling in the congregation, there was a good feeling in the air. which was so totally different from those scared, freaked out feelings that I had experienced from the ones that are trying to attach themselves to other people. So, unseen entities, they can be neutral, they can be happy, they can be really frightened and frightening. I've never really come across anything that was absolutely malevolent, which reminds me, or which I was just kind of what we're getting into now. We're getting into some of the more subjective stuff that's happened to me. But before I do that, I see another one here that I'm going to look at. My first wife, she had a friend that was a news anchor at some TV show or whatever. And she was a very good looking woman. I met her, and when I looked at her, I could see an ugly face. And the ugly face was not, I mean, she had a beautiful face when you looked at the beautiful face, but I saw the ugly face. It was like that ugly face was pasted over that beautiful face, and I knew that that ugly face was the real person. And that kind of freaked me out because never have I really seen two faces on a person before. Never really, never really that way. There's a lot of people that think they come across like a lot of this psychic stuff is so easy. Uh, but I'm not, it's kind of tricky to describe because in a way it's easy, but in a way it's not easy. It's kind of like you have to understand what's happening. An example of that is with these, where I started to talk about astral projecting and I diverged off, got off on the sideline. What I found out was I'm very oriented toward the light. I'm very oriented toward the higher spiritual levels. But I have integrated my shadow self. I've developed a very strong earth connection, a very strong connection to the core of the earth and the lower levels. But because of the sheer integration of these, the light, the spiritual thing, and how it's connected with the solid ladder like chain that links to the lower levels, a lot of times myself, my soul, my astral, not just one astral body, but all of them combined, they're almost like a balloon filled with air that you try to push down into the water and it keeps wanting to bounce up. So what I'm saying is, even though I've really developed these astral bodies and these abilities, a lot of the lower levels actually for a long time tried to push me out because the of the negativity, because of the vibrations didn't match, and they wanted to keep their own vibrations. But this is something that's changed because now I'm becoming more and more drawn toward the lower levels, and it's more and more easy for me to function at these lower levels, which is because the lower levels are purging and their vibrational level is rising to a point where we're actually on the same level. When we're on the same level, then that's the point where I can expect to astral project and kind of see the trees or skim across the trees or fly around like that. Or maybe look at myself lying at the foot of the bed, something like that. Those are all I read these books. I'd read these books or hear these stories about astral projection where somebody's doing that. They're astral projected. They're standing at the foot of the bed and looking at their self sleeping. And other than that one time, way back when I was a teenager, I'd never been able to do that. I finally realized at one point, I finally realized that if I was out in the astral and I got within 100 feet of my physical body, I was pulled in so fast that it just happened that way. However, as I said, now I'm my able to remain at lower levels, and I'm actually starting to experiment with that and try to do some deliberate projections uh, to see just how far that can go. I just put that in there. Let's see, I'm just about done here, I think, with what I had. Yeah, I think that about does it. Um, just another thing talking about the supernatural or synchronicity. There was a point, I was 24. It was my birthday is the 24th of April, and it was the time of my 24th birthday, so that's my golden birthday. That is the year when I went to Germany as a college student. I stayed there for 3 months as a college student. I stayed there for 3 months just as a tourist or whatever. And it was the most life changing point of my life. However, what was interesting and totally uh, synchronicity, the seat number on the plane of my flight there was seat number 24. The hotel room that I stayed in, I didn't get to pick these, they were picked for me, was number 24. The seat number on the plane on my way back home was 24. Synchronicity, it there's something about that being my 24th birthday and stuff like that. So I'm what I'm just sharing. If I'm just done, I'm at the end of this video. But what I wanted to share was that a lot of the things of the unseen world, and I didn't really get into deals with dreams or visions or anything like that, not very much. I tried to keep it dealing with conscious awareness stuff, real life things that were involved with the real life. And it's like there's a lot of evidence from personal experience that has me totally believe in the reality of an unseen world, of unseen entities, good and bad and neutral. And when I add in the stuff from the dreams and the visions, it gets even more pronounced. So there's absolutely no discussion, as far as I'm concerned, about whether such entities exist, whether the soul exists, whether astral bodies exist. They have limitations, they have rules that they go by, they have all these kind of things. And I'm just sharing it. I guess I'm done with this. I hope you find it interesting. It's my take on the supernatural, which exists. And I'm not trying to convince anybody or give anybody reasons for it. I'm just trying to share my own experience. Till next time, thank you.